Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Amy Sam. I am the Health Education Project Specialist at the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient Family Learning Center at Mass General. Before I get started, I just want to go over a few items with you all. Please note that today's session is being recorded for educational purposes. If you're interested in viewing the recording, it'll be made available on the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Please note that you are in listen-only mode. Everyone has been muted so you can hear our guest speaker today. If you have any questions for our guest speaker, you may use the chat feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. You'll have time from the end. Only Blum Center staff and our guest speaker will see your questions. Please do not share any personal medical information or questions in the chat. If you have a personal medical question, please ask your doctor. Lastly, at the end of today's session, you'll be directed to a brief survey, which we'd like to ask you to help us complete. Your feedback is important to us as we plan future programs. Okay, so next I would like to introduce you all to today's guest speaker. Joining us today, we have Dr. Christine Ritchie. Dr. Ritchie is the Kenneth L. Meinecker Endowed Chair in Geriatrics and Director of Research for the Division of Palliative Care and Geriatric Medicine at Mass General. She is a board-certified geriatrician, palliative care physician, and health services researcher who conducts research focused on optimizing the quality of life for those with chronic serious illness. Dr. Ritchie directs the Center for Aging and Serious Illness Research in the MGH Mung Institute and the MGH Dementia Care Collaborative. She joins us today to give a talk on living our best life as we age. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Ritchie.
Thanks so much, Amy. Appreciate our being able to have this time together. And let me share my slides. Can you see them okay? Excellent. Okay. Well, it is a real honor to be here with you, and I'm so glad for this time together. And this picture that you see on the front of this first slide actually comes from a mural that was on a wall very near where I used to live in San Francisco. And what I like about it is that I think as we age, we often think of ourselves in different ways than we may feel sometimes or even appear. We often think of ourselves as our full self that represents all of our history and all of our lived reality. And often that's manifest in beautiful ways that only we internally can see or know because it's what we have lived with for many years. What I'd like to do today is go over with you a lot of different dimensions around ways we can live our best life as we age. And I'm going to be covering a lot of material. So my hope for you is that you'll just find one or two things that you want to try and that will be your takeaway at the end. Some of these things you may be doing already, right? And others perhaps not. So my hope for this time together is that this will just give you some food for thought for how you can live your best life as we age. I'd like to first start and engage in a reflection together around our common experiences of aging, because there are things that are more common that occur as part of our aging experience. And then really want to spend most of our time talking about what it might look like to live well as we age. What does that look like in terms of optimizing our chances to live well, planning, and growing? And my caveat here is that for most of us, living well does require making a change. It requires changing old habits that we might have accumulated along the way and adopting new habits. And so my hope for you is that you will reflect on perhaps a habit that you'd like to change after the end of our time together and use that as a starting point for moving into a new place of wellness for you as you journey forward in your own aging process. So let's talk first about common experiences of aging. When I first was thinking about sharing with you, I thought about showing you like 15 slides around common experiences of aging, but I don't know that that's necessary. I think what I'd like to do is just reflect with you and hear from you in the chat about the common experiences that you're observing, either for yourself or someone that's important to you, and how that might be informing your lived experience. So here are common changes that occur with aging. So it's very common for us to change our roles, and those roles are quite diverse. So our roles might change as a caregiver. Our roles might change as a partner. Our roles might change in the work that we're doing. And so we often do experience changes in roles as we age. We also experience changes in our identity, and that is, let's just say that our identity was being a parent. Well, that might change as we age. Or our role might be very much entrenched in, or excuse me, our identity might be very entrenched in our capabilities, and perhaps our capabilities functionally or otherwise might change as we age and change then our identity. Our relationships often change when we age. We experience more loss by and large as we live longer. Our ability to do certain things may not look the same as it did in previous decades. And our living arrangements may change. We may have been accustomed to living in one particular setting, and we may end up moving into different types of settings. Perhaps we've been in a two-story walk up and we moved to a one-story, or perhaps we've lived in an apartment and we moved to an assisted living facility, or many other kinds, or we move in with a family member. So living arrangements can also change as we age. What I'd like to do is I'd like to actually ask you to put in the chat other changes that you have observed for yourself or for others that are important to you, that you observe as a common occurrence with aging. And if you could put those in the chat, Amy will read some of those off for us. And Amy, you're on mute.
Sorry. We have folks who are sharing that they have friends and family with serious illness and palliative care, changes in health, how other people see you, changes in their health and physical abilities, opening up opportunities, poor hygiene habits, joint pain, tenderness, getting ready for exercise, insecurities, feeling invisible, their perspectives of life and priorities, changes in their independence, lack of energy, how to remain relevant, holding changes are not all negative. They feel freer. They feel that they have more perspective and feel deeper. Difficulty with hearing, vision, among other things, which makes it hard for them to cope with the world. Changes in
great. Thank you so much for sharing, Amy, and thanks to all of you for sharing. I love the reflections on the changes sometimes in capabilities or abilities, and also the fact that many changes can be incredibly positive. And my hope for you is that your takeaway from this time is that change, while inevitable, does not necessarily mean something that doesn't actually offer opportunities for growth, enrichment, and ultimately joy. So thank you for bringing up a lot of different changes that are very common as we as we age. So in that context of thinking about what we might do to optimize our well-being as we age, I want to start first with some just common things that we know now from the literature as being very important. And certainly if one is experiencing pain or one is experiencing other constraints because of health issues, then one has to make adaptations to some of the things that I will be suggesting to you. That being said, this comes from sort of large bits of epidemiologic data and clinical trials. And when we think about adaptation, we'll think about how that might be appropriate for really anybody, depending on sort of what their underlying health status is. So the first thing to think about in terms of optimizing one's well-being as we age is to think about diet. And I'm not going to get into a lot of specifics because I think people can get really stuck on, should I take this vitamin or that vitamin, or should I do this, that, the other? I really want to focus on two things. And the first is moving to plant-based diet. So there are now a multitude of studies that have showed that when you move to a plant-based diet, you gain years and you gain positive, healthy years. There was a study that was published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2020 that looked at the survival rate of over 400,000 people who had reported their diet and lifestyle information 16 years earlier. And here's the amazing thing. In this study, just shifting 3% of calorie intake from animal protein to plant protein corresponded with a 10% decrease in death over that same time period. And there have been a number of studies that demonstrate the value of plant-based diets, and many or plant preference, I would say plants preferential diets, and the ones that you see here, the Mediterranean diet that's been recommended for reducing cardiovascular disease risk, the DASH diet that's been shown to be important in reducing blood pressure, and the MIND diet, which is a variation on the Mediterranean diet for neurodegenerative delay, all have suggested benefit, and many of it probably relates to moving away from a predominant animal-based protein diet to plant-based diet. And I would say this doesn't have to be all or nothing. This doesn't mean suddenly becoming a vegetarian. It means just thinking about how you might shift from being more preferentially focused on animal protein for your source of protein and moving to a plant-based diet. And I think we now have strong enough literature on this that this is really a way that we can all optimize our well-being as we age. The other data that is growing increasingly strong is the data around intermittent fasting. And there's a lot of different ways to engage in intermittent fasting. Some of you may have heard about the 5-2 diet, which is essentially where one has a very significant reduction in calorie intake for 2 days a week. So, 500 to 600 calories for 2 days a week. Or time-restricted fasting, where one doesn't eat for 16 hours of the day, and does eat during 8 hours of the day. And then there's a number of other alternate day fasting. There's a number of different sort of fasting strategies that have been used. Interestingly, by and large, they have demonstrated pretty substantively positive impact on cardiovascular or cardiometabolic health outcomes related to blood pressure and cardiovascular risk, show very mild to moderate weight loss. I'm not sure this is the best way to lose weight. In fact, I think for some people, we want you to lose weight, but nevertheless can be helpful in reducing oxidative stress, improving your cholesterol profile so that you have less bad cholesterol or low density lipoprotein and more good cholesterol, improved appetite regulation, and then some suggestion, although not as consistent, that this kind of intermittent fasting can also have a favorable impact on your gut microbiome. But that data is newer and not as consistent. And then physical activity is another one, which is just incredibly important. And again, for all of these, I would not think of them as all or nothing. This is just trying to move in the direction of from wherever you are to some place that's closer to what might be optimal. So there are a number of recommendations that you'll see out there in the UK recommendations for reducing risk for dementia. There's a recommendation for at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic physical activity per week and 75 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity per week. I should say, or 150 minutes of moderate or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity per week. And other recommendations that come from the cardiovascular disease literature and overall health literature suggest variations on this set of recommendations. So you may ask yourself, well, what does moderate intensity aerobic physical activity look like? And what does vigorous look like? And so moderate intensity physical activity basically means you can talk, but you can't sing, which I think is very cute way of thinking about moderate intensity cardiovascular. So, you know, a brisk walk, you can still have a conversation with somebody, but you might have trouble singing. Cycling, dancing, doing your housework chores, all of these can sort of comprise moderate intensity cardiovascular physical activity. And then what counts as vigorous intensity cardiovascular activity is where you actually might not really be able to even have a easy conversation, difficulty talking without pausing, which is a sign of vigorous activity. Now, just as a caveat, if you haven't been engaging in physical activity, then you would want to have a conversation with your healthcare provider before engaging in these forms of activity. By and large, most people can safely engage in moderate intensity physical activity without undue harm, but it really depends on where you're starting. So if you're starting at no physical activity, then celebrate doing 5 minutes a day. And if you're starting with some, then just going up just a bit. And keep in mind that the literature also suggests that even 10-minute bursts of physical activity are valuable. So I think some of us engage in, and I've certainly been guilty of this in the past, sort of this all or nothing thinking, which is like, oh, if I can't do like 30 minutes, it's not worth doing it. That's actually not true. Even 5 to 10 minutes is so much better and has demonstrated benefit than no activity at all. There's also value in engaging in activities that enhance your balance because balance is critically important for preventing falls. And if you engage in these activities, things like yoga or Tai Chi, then the recommendation is ideally to engage in those kind of activities 3 or more days per week. And then muscle strengthening activities that involve your major muscle groups, like your core muscles, your gluteus or buttocks muscles, your large muscles of your legs and your back. Those are also recommended to be done at least 2 times per week, because one thing that we do know is true is with the hormonal changes that occur as we age, we're more likely to develop or more likely to have a reduction in our muscle mass and our muscle strength. So you really have to work it. If we don't use it, unfortunately, we do lose it. Social connection is also something incredibly important. I think we're really beginning to appreciate the incredible importance of being connected to others. If there's one thing COVID showed us is that social isolation and loneliness are not good for us. And in fact, there was literature even before COVID that showed that social isolation and loneliness was equivalent in terms of its mortality risk as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And there was a recent report that came out from the Surgeon General showing, Vivek Murthy, showing again the incredibly negative health consequences of social isolation. So we may think of this as a nice to have. Turns out it's really important for our health and well-being. It's probably important for our cognitive function as well. And for some of this might be natural. For some of us, You might be like the folks playing chess in this picture. For others of us who might be more prone to introversion, this takes work. And so thinking of it as something that we do for overall health is important as something to just factor into your life and plan for. There are a lot of different ways to stay connected, but for me personally, it's useful to actually be planful and intentional about it. Thinking about who my vital connections are and thinking of ways to stay connected to them regularly. Making sure I have contact information so that if I'm thinking about somebody, I don't have to go searching around to find that information. And then getting creative and trying new ways to connect with new people can be incredibly generative and can help us to grow and adapt in new ways. For some of us, an impediment to social connection is challenges with hearing, and some of you brought that up in the chat. We do often experience age-related hearing loss, and when we experience that, it can be hard. It can be hard in loud settings. It can be hard even in regular conversations. And when that happens, it's easy to check out and to not really engage. And so we're losing out on the social stimulation and the connection that probably is important for our neural pathways in our brain, and probably explains, at least in part, why there is a hypothesis that seems to be now being borne out in some scientific literature that up to 8% of dementia cases may be related to hearing loss. Really interesting study that came out this year from the United Kingdom, where they looked at the UK Biobank, large number of persons who provide their data for the UK Biobank. And what was really interesting is that they looked at people without hearing loss and then compared people to those with hearing loss and compared those who had hearing loss with hearing aids versus hearing loss without hearing aids. And the amazing thing here is that if you had hearing loss without hearing aids, you had a 50% increased risk for development of dementia, a 1.56 risk ratio. And but if you had hearing aids, you didn't have that increased risk. Really highlighting the importance of using hearing aids. Hearing aids are tough. As somebody who has hearing aids, I can tell you they're tough to get adjusted to, and yet can be so important for helping us stay connected. Sleep. Sleep is another thing that's very easy to forego, and yet we know that it's incredibly important for our overall well-being. And in fact, now a number of studies have come out that show the value of sleep for a whole host of health outcomes. But just for starters, as it relates to survival and mortality benefit. So that what we know from this study is that when you compare people who have lower sleep durations, that they often will have lower survival. And you can see that in this picture. If you look at the line that goes up and down, you see our survival rates. And then if you look at essentially those lines that are different colors, the 7 to 8 and the 6 to 7 hours are at the top. People have the highest survival rates there. But when we either have excessive amounts of sleep or inadequate amounts of sleep, like less than or equal to 5 hours per night, on average, that is associated with increased mortality. Now, sleep can be very tough as we get older. In fact, most of us start having more trouble with sleep as we get older. And so attention to sleep hygiene, addressing, reducing our digital and light input as we get closer to our sleeping hours, being careful about caffeine intake, being thoughtful about engaging in regular physical activity earlier in the day. These are all some things that are really important for reducing our risk for poor sleep. And if you haven't read this book by Matthew Walker, it's a really easy read that highlights the incredible value of sleep and why sleep is so important, even though many of us think of it sometimes as being optional. So we've talked about some behaviors that we can engage in that can help optimize our living well. Now let's talk about other things that can help us live well as we age. And these are what I would put in the bucket of planning. And I want to start with this caveat, or this quote, I should say, from Maya Angelou, which is hoping for the best, prepared for the worst, and unsurprised by anything in between is a way to help us live well as we age. Many of us we like to hope for the best, and we don't like to quote unquote go there in terms of preparing for the worst. But the interesting thing is that when we're prepared for the worst, it doesn't take us by surprise. We often are in a better place, and we often put those who we care about also in a better place by planning ahead. So let's just think about a few facts which sort of fall under the category of what I would say preparing for the worst. And here are just some few facts to consider. Most of us will spend some time in a nursing home or be dependent on others prior to our death. And we don't like to think about that, but that is likely to be true. And so if we plan for it, then it will be less fearful, and we'll have strategies for navigating that. Going to a nursing home, going into an assisted living facility, being dependent on others, these actually have costs associated with them. And so being prepared for those costs on the front end can be extremely important. With aging, we are at profoundly higher risk for being scammed. And so we want to be prepared for that. We want to know what we can do to protect ourselves from being scammed. And with aging, there will be a number of treatment decisions that we will need others to make for us, because in that moment, we likely won't be able to make those decisions for ourselves. The graph that you see on the right side of this slide essentially shows that there are a increased hazard, that means risk, for the development of difficulty with regular activities of daily living, things like bathing, like getting out of bed, toileting, walking, dressing, eating, as we age, and that those risks are higher for those who have some major chronic condition to begin with. So if you or someone important to you already has a major chronic condition or a serious illness, their likelihood for developing some level of dependence is pretty high. And so that's something, again, that's best to plan for, and makes actually the walking through it easier when we plan ahead. So when we think about best case, worst case, these are the things that I would encourage you to think about as you think about best case, worst case, which is, let's think about maybe the worst case scenario for living arrangements. What can we do to navigate that and to be prepared for that time when we or someone that we care about needs to get additional help? And how do we plan for that now? What might that look like? We'll talk a little bit more about that. What about caregiving? Who would we want potentially that person to be who might need to serve in a caregiving role for us? And how do we plan for that? Finances, transportation, and healthcare decision-making. And we'll talk specifically about living arrangements, finances, and healthcare decision-making. So living arrangements. Wherever you're living right now, or wherever that person is that you care about who may be aging is living right now, it's incredibly valuable to plan now to make your home age-friendly, or your living setting age-friendly. There are some really wonderful resources. I put some of those resources at the bottom of this particular slide, but just some very straightforward things you can do is make sure you have great light in your home. Sometimes our homes can become a little bit like caves. And so really making sure that we have good lighting can mitigate against falls, having good lighting that actually turns on at night so that you actually can see where you're going. If you need to get up and use the restroom, for example, lighting, being thoughtful about lighting can be incredibly valuable. Going ahead and paying attention to how to optimize support in those places where we really need it, which often is in the bathroom or next to our bed, and going ahead and getting, for example, grab bars and other support tools right there at the ready gets us prepared for down the road. Being thoughtful about falls hazards, all of us who engage in geriatrics and palliative care have lived and breathed the hazards of throw rugs, which we all love, but can be quite hazardous if we're not really thoughtful and attentive to their security. And then making sure that at least one entryway in our home has a no-step entry can be extremely valuable. That could be through a ramp or through some other mechanism, elevator, or some tool that can enable you to get up and down stairs. But going ahead and planning for that now, thinking about how you might consolidate rooms so that you can mitigate against going up and down stairs. And then happily, there's a lot of technology now that can be used that helps with home monitoring, that can help with safety, and going ahead and planning for that now as well. Plan for a time and think about who, what, and where you will want to be in that when that time comes when you might need assistance. Learn about the long-term care services in your community. For those of us who live in Massachusetts, we're really lucky. We have a lot of long-term care services here that are available to us. And probably most important, and I'll say this over and over again, is to not only think about this, but talk to others about your thoughts and plans. Talk to those people who are important to in your life about your thoughts and plans so that these living arrangements can be addressed on the front end. It makes it so much easier than waiting for a crisis to occur. Finances. So think about now, just like we think about healthcare decision making, who you would want to be your financial decision maker if that time were to come when you can't make those decisions for yourself. Think about who that might look like. And at the bottom of this slide, there's a really wonderful resource that is about how to consider a financial caregiver and how you would consider your options and what might work for you. And go ahead and designate a durable power of attorney that would only be activated when you're not able to make decisions for yourself. Become knowledgeable about scams. This resource guide that you see on the right, called Money Smart for Older Adults, is an incredible resource for all the crazy ways we can be scammed. In fact, there's some little mini training vignettes that are available at this site as well. Being thoughtful about this, both for yourself and on behalf of those that you care about, can be extremely valuable to keep really tragic financial loss from happening. And then consider your savings and plan for long-term care. You know, I've always been intrigued by the fact that we plan for college, but we don't plan for long-term care, even though for most of us, this is an inevitable part of our future. And if we plan for it now, it makes it a lot easier going forward. And last but certainly not least, relates to healthcare decisions. And I would say that the most important healthcare decision is identifying who that person is, who you want to be your voice if you don't have it. If for whatever reason you get hit by a bus tomorrow and you're not able to, and you're unconscious, who do you want to make those decisions for you if you can't make them on your own? That's probably more important than anything else, honestly. And then making sure whoever that voice is knows that you designate them to be your voice and your decision maker if you can't make decisions for your own, and that they know what's important to you. That is probably the most important healthcare decision you can make. Remember, there are a plethora of important decisions, healthcare decisions that come up that have nothing to do with being a do not resuscitate or having a do not resuscitate in the conversation. So keep that in mind. There are many other important decisions, and think about what matters most in your life and make sure you tell others. I personally am a big fan of Prepare for Your Care, even though I'll say there are many, many wonderful decision-making tools for healthcare decision-making. Prepare for Your Care is nice because it has decision-making tools that are appropriate for every state in the country. And so for me, when I moved to Massachusetts, I filled out the advanced care planning tool for the state of Massachusetts and made sure that I communicated with my family members what mattered most to me and what kind of treatment decisions would be important for them to know about for me, so that they could actually serve as that voice for me if for whatever reason I get hit by a bus today or tomorrow. So that talks about some of the planning that we can do. And I want to finish up by talking about growing and adapting. And, you know, as I've gone through my own aging experience and thought about sort of what we do as we age, I think one of the things that regardless of what age we are now, we should really be sort of building muscles in is around growing and adapting and really holding on to a growth mindset so that we have that muscle as we go forward. It really relates to this concept of resilience. And some of you may have heard of this term. Resilience has been defined a lot of different ways, but here, this particular definition is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. And I show you this picture of the slide because this is a lava field. So this all at one time was a bubbling cauldron of lava. And you can see that it's pretty desolate. And when it was that bubbling cauldron of lava, nothing was growing in this area. It was completely desolate. And you can imagine that for this little space, that was a time of tremendous adversity. And yet, if you start going closer and you look, even here in this lava field, you start seeing these little pieces, these little plants growing up, this fern here on the lower slide that are growing up and adapting to, frankly, not a particularly hospitable environment for growing and developing. And yet that is our opportunity as we face adversity and as we face new sources of stress. Many people think of Charles Darwin as being talking about the survival of the fittest, but actually what Darwin says, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. And so starting to build our muscles around change, embracing change wherever we are in our life can be very important as we go forward in our aging journey. Now, there are a number of features that promote resilience and adaptation, and this comes from a systematic review that shows some of these features, and we'll talk about some of these. We'll talk about happiness, and we'll talk about self-acceptance, and then we'll also talk about a social coherence as we go forward. So there are many different ways to adapt, but one thing that can be extremely valuable for us as we think about adapting to change is actually being more fully present to our current reality, ruminating less on the past, worrying less about the future, and staying right where we are and being present and fully aware in that space. Many of you have probably heard about mindfulness and meditations, and this may, for some of us, it may kind of turn us off because we may think of it as something kind of squishy. And yet a lot of what we have now learned about mindfulness is that it's really a way of training our brain. And I think of it really almost as a brain exercise more than anything else, as a way of guiding us so that we can actually train our brain just like we train the rest of our body to be its most healthy self. I'm showing you 3 different apps on this particular slide because they're all free, F-R-E-E. There are a lot of mindfulness apps out there that are wonderful. Some of you may be using them, These 3 mindfulness apps are free, and they are all listed below. They are all scientifically based, so they're based on scientific evidence, and I would encourage you to check them out and see if they might help you in your own development of resilience, which mindfulness can be a contributing component for. But also love for you to think about happiness as a muscle. We often think about happiness as something that just happens. But what we've come to appreciate is that actually our minds can take us places that may or may not serve us. And so thinking about, again, our minds as a place where we can lean into new ways of thinking and new ways of being can be an incredibly fun and enriching thing to try and practice, regardless of where you are in your life. Some of you may be familiar with Sean Atcher's book, The Happiness Advantage. His TED Talk is what you see here on the left hand of the slide, where he's talking about the happiness advantage. And actually, it was thanks to Sean Atcher when I first watched this TED Talk now many, many years ago, that I started engaging in the practice of gratitude journaling. It was really his recommendation that if we write down 3 new things every day that we're grateful for, it can rewire our brains for optimism. And I will say that it's been a game changer for me personally. Sean Atcher also talks about spending 2 minutes describing a meaningful experience that's occurred over the previous 24 hours, doing something fun, making yourself sometimes do something fun for 15 minutes, a meditation, which we've already talked about, and then conscious acts of kindness, which can be a kind of gratitude where we think about doing something for another person, writing a thank you note for someone who's done something for us that we are grateful for, doing something kind, giving somebody we see on the street, a Dunkin' Donut gift card, whatever it is. These conscious acts of kindness, meditation, gratitudes have now been shown to be really important aspects of a muscle that we can build and that can contribute to happiness. The other thing I want to highlight is that we all have these internal narrators, and they can be helpful or actually quite harmful. And I think one of the things that is important to keep in mind is that these internal narratives, these little internal conversations that we have with ourselves, can be, we can think of them as being equivalent to ourselves, but just keep in mind that these internal conversations are not necessarily always right, and they can sometimes be non-productive. So remembering that your internal narrator is not always right, that narrator may be saying things that actually are not consistent with reality, or that may be exaggerating reality, is important to keep in mind. And the other thing to keep in mind is that your internal narrator is not you. Your internal narrator is a compilation of thoughts and narratives that you've heard from others, that you've been socialized to, that may be related to your culture. And so because it's not you, you actually have the opportunity to talk back to your internal narrator and actually question it and ask yourself, is this internal narrative that I'm actually engaging in productive or helpful, or is it actually contributing to something that is making me have a less positive and productive and constructive life? Another thing that can be incredibly helpful for us as we think about adapting and growing as we age is adopting a curiosity mindset, just getting curious about everything. For example, looking at these lines and thinking to ourselves, I wonder how those limes got here. I wonder what the process is for a lime fruit developing. Just whatever it is, just getting curious and being attentive to what we see, asking ourselves questions. There's some joy in that, but growth mindset enables us to also encounter difficulty also with a place of curiosity, non-judgment, and the opportunity to learn from whatever it is that we're experiencing, and grow from it. So as we wrap up, I hope that I've given you at least one thing to think about, one potential habit for you to change or adopt, and move that as a place forward for you to optimize your well-being as you age, to live your best life as you age, regardless of where you are currently in that journey, regardless of whether or not you are already experiencing functional challenges or a serious illness. Most of the things that we talked about today have opportunity for us, regardless of where we are. And rather than saying that you have to do all of them, just choosing one little tidbit to have as a goal would be something I would really encourage you to consider. So I want to thank you, and hope we have some opportunities for questions as we go forward.
Thank you so much. We are now at the end of the session. If you have any questions for Dr. Ritchie, feel free to enter them in the chat. We have a question regarding plant-based diet. Do you have any tips on how to start a plant-based diet?
Sure. You know, this used to be a lot harder. And now, fortunately, everybody's getting really creative about plant-based food. And I think that's been to our advantage. And so, you know, if you literally go to your grocery store, I'm beginning to notice that there's like sections of the frozen food section and other sections where you'll see that things that back in the day almost always had meat associated with them no longer have meat associated with them. They're now mushroom products and various different sort of plant-based protein products that are available to you. And what I would say is, you know, if you are just not even, if you like take a scan of your current diet and you notice that you're frankly not getting like 3 to 5 vegetables a day, I'd start there. Just work on, you know, trying, and also get curious and try out stuff. You know, all of our flavors and our preferences change over time. There was a time in my life, for example, I really did not like coconut. And now I really like it. And there was a time in my life when I didn't like olives. And now I'm like, I love olives. So just because at a time in your life you didn't like it, try it again. You still might not, but you might like it. So I would get kind of adventuresome and try something new that is plant-based. And then I would trial some of these different plant-based protein products and see what you like and don't like. You know, I'll just say for me personally, as somebody who is predominantly eats only plant-based foods, I'm not a huge fan of soy-based protein products. And so I'm really happy that there are pea protein and other kinds of protein-based products that are available out there. But I would just say be incremental and just go, you know, if you really used to having meat every single day, just go one day without it. I would not go all or nothing unless you just decide this is like a major life change you want to make. And that's fine too. But I would start with either increasing the portfolio of vegetables and fruits that you're consuming, or just slowly pulling back on animal-based protein, maybe just once a week or twice a week.
Thank you. We have a couple of requests in the chat. If you're able to share the free apps, so you referenced a few free apps, if you're able to provide links to them or pull them up on the screen again so that folks
Absolutely, I would love to do that. Let me pull those up right now, and I will put them in the chat. And then also I think we'll have this information available elsewhere, but just so you have them handy. It looks like the middle one didn't pop up as a link. But the Healthy Minds app, which is in the middle, if you just go to your app store and put in Healthy Minds, it'll say HM, it'll be a little blue square. So, but when we share, there it is, hminnovations.org. It just didn't pop up as a link. So there it is, but you'll have to just write that down, hminnovations.org.
Okay. And then we have a question regarding sleep. Does the kind of sleep matter, such as REM or deep sleep?
Yes. And I would say, for starters, just working on the sleep duration, if you really are like on the short end of the stick with sleep, is a good start. But it does look like having a proportion of your sleep in the deep sleep mode and some proportion in REM sleep mode is important. REM sleep is actually what usually gets the short end of the stick when we shorten our sleep quantity. And so for many people, it's actually working on getting more REM sleep that's the issue, because that actually is more likely to be what you're going to experience when you sleep for longer amounts of time. And I'll tell you, for me personally, like because I monitor my sleep, I can tell you that when I sleep for shorter amounts of time, it's the REM sleep that bears the brunt of the sleep. I'll just say one other thing I didn't mention about sleep is it appears that sleep is also really important for cognitive function. And it's thought that some of the bad proteins that accumulate in our brain that may be associated with the development of dementia are sort of put in the trash can and sent out to the trash bin during sleep. And so sleep is important for our cognitive function as well.
Thank you. We have a question regarding eggs and cheese. Are they considered animal-based protein?
They are considered animal-based protein. I still think that they are because they have some of the other cheese in particular. We'll just start with cheese. Cheese tends to be high in saturated fat, so it increases your cardiovascular disease risk, and it is probably like other forms of animal-based protein has an increased carcinogenic effect. So I would say they're not the same as plant-based protein. That being said, I would also say that they are a good step if you're trying to sort of move in the direction of a more plant-based protein. They may be a step that you may want to take just to move in the step of plant-based protein.
Thank you. As we get older, we often worry about our memory declining. Do you have any tips on how we can preserve our memory?
Yes. So there are a lot of the things we talked about today actually are quite important for cognitive function. So things that relate to diet, sleep, physical activity. I think physical activity is probably one of the very important things to do. Social connection, also very important. Intellectual stimulation through social connection. And then, I think there are a number of apps out there that also can sort of encourage you to engage in problem solving and sort of pushing your brain in a way that probably helps some of those neural pathways stay active. But the literature on those apps are not consistent. So I would say, it's probably a good way to keep your mind fresh, especially if you're not able to engage in regular social connection. And I would say the things that we have much better sort of literature on relate to things like physical activity, diet, sleep, and social connection.
Thank you. There are a few questions regarding the recording of today's session. It is being recorded and it'll be made available on the Blum Center website. I'll share that link with you all. So in the chat, you'll see it's going to direct you to our Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center, specifically our news and events page. Once you go there, there's a section titled Past Blum Center Programs, and that will take you to all of our recordings, including this one.
Amy, can I just speak to I think one of the last chats, because I think it's wonderful. It says, I've seen many older adults who've successfully aged who have the mindset, this too shall pass. And I just to reiterate, I think that gets back to sort of that internal narrator, and having an internal narrator that is not ruminating or perseverating or getting very caught up in the situation can be extremely valuable. And then also for those who actually are experiencing depression and anxiety, I could not emphasize enough how valuable getting support through therapy and through medications can be. And so treat that like any other part of your body and health. It's really important, and it really is important for improving your overall well-being.
Thank you. We have a question regarding, so I don't know if you have any comments on this, if there's any reason for pairing gerontology and palliative care as a unit at Mass General. It seems as if two are equivalent in some way. Something to consider if a younger person could need palliative care, for example, and being older, but not necessarily need palliative care.
Sure. So thanks for bringing that up. So geriatrics and palliative care, I would say, are intersecting Venn diagrams, but they're definitely not the same. They're different specialties. They're different fields of research, and yet there are a lot of commonalities, because certainly as we get older, we're more likely to develop a serious illness. And so there's that intersecting Venn diagram. We may be more likely to have symptoms that might be well managed by people in palliative care. And we may also be facing, serious life-limiting illnesses. That being said, palliative care is appropriate at any age and at any stage of a serious illness. So just to say, palliative care expands way beyond our being older. It's really appropriate for any age of anybody experiencing a serious illness, and regardless of whether or not that person is seeking treatment for curative intent. Palliative care is really around an extra layer of support to support people going through very challenging and often unexpected illnesses that require adaptation. And I think that's part of what we were talking about today.
Thank you so much. So we are about at time. Before we end today's session, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
No, thank you for being here, and I really hope that on your journey of aging that it will bring you joy and growth and opportunities to embrace change.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much for spending the hour with us. And for everyone who joined today's session, thank you so much. Hopefully you found today's session helpful. As I had mentioned, today's session is being recorded. It'll be made available on the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum-Center. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day.